Chautauqua Lake Association, welcome. And we have Paul Stage, the president of the Chautauqua Lake Association, and Doug Conroe, who is the chief executive officer, everything to everybody in the Chautauqua Lake Association, and thank you. Paul, I'm going to just try to, the crowd may not know you completely as I do, but are you a local guy?
Been around for a long time.
No, you were born here?
Born and raised.
Born and raised, whereabouts?
I grew up in Dewitttville. Born and raised in Dewitt, Westfield. Spent my childhood in Dewitttville. Went to Mayville High School, and been in the insurance financial industry for the last 40 years, working out of Bemis Point in Jamestown, and have a great interest in the lake. Participate in a number of different nonprofits and that kind of thing. So.
Did your dad start the insurance business?
He did. He started in 1972. I started in 1976.
What brought him here? Or was he a native as well?
He was a native as well. Grew up in Dewitttville, worked at the milk plant in Mayville, and then just went on from there.
Your mother likewise from the area?
Yes, she was born and raised. She is originally part of the Cheney clan, had the farm over the big farm up on the hill, just below Bemis Point. My grandfather was Asa Cheney, and they still have the farm. Well, parts have been given to the state and that kind of thing, but it's still in the Cheney name. So.
Aside from that, I mean, you have one piece. You're an insurance guy, but you and your wife have the Maple Springs Lakeside Inn.
Right.
And how long have you had that?
32 years, I think.
Is that a sort of a bed and breakfast type thing, or?
Yeah, it's a bed and breakfast, small inn. My wife runs it. Primarily in the summertime. It's pretty quiet this time of year. Chautauqua gets quiet, but it's a great little property on Chautauqua Lake, and the reasons that we're interested in the lake.
Well, in addition, you and your son have a vested interest in something that we hear the sounds waft across Chautauqua Lake, called the Chautauqua Bell. What's their relationship there?
So my son purchased the Chautauqua Bell in 2007. It was a rehabilitation project, still is. We seem to be updating everything all along the way, and it goes on and on and on. It's a very expensive proposition. He raised his hand at an auction, and then he found out that banks generally don't lend 18-year-old kids too much money when they don't have a work history and stuff. And along came Grandpa and Mom and Dad and Grandma, and we all kind of pitched in, and $750,000 later, steamboat goes up and down the lake.
What's the history behind the bell? I'm not sure I know who brought it here, but what's the story?
It was built in 1975, 76 for the bicentennial by a guy by the name of James Webster. Awesome guy. He loved steam. He loved to make steam engines go. And he built the steamboat. He built a couple of other smaller steamboats, but he left the Chautauqua Bell on the lake as a legacy for his name. He was an awesome guy.
And did you buy from that family? Or
it came from the Sea Lion Project, which was a nonprofit that was formed around a ship that was being built by Ernest Cowan, who died this last year, actually. And the ship was it was beautiful. It was really a Picasso, and the community didn't know what they had, and it was subsequently given away, sent to Buffalo, sank in the harbor up there, was resurrected, and when it came back, I got re-involved in that again, and it's now moved on to a better place. It's going to be down in a community called Henricus, Virginia, and if you all remember the story of Pocahontas and John Smith, this is the city that they have a park there. It's about a $15 or $20 million park, and the Sea Lion is going to go there as a marine exhibit where they're in the process of rebuilding it. And hopefully they'll see its glory days again. I don't know, we'll see.
The Sea Lion Project also had something called the Bemis Point Stowe Ferry, and you're the president of that.
I am, yeah.
Other than Chautauqua, I mean, Chautauqua Institution, anything you're not president of?
United States. Yeah. But we are really proud of this old ferry, and I'll tell you what, we have the most awesome bunch of volunteers, and you know, it's really easy to be the president of something when you have good people. We have good executive directors and board members in the organizations that I'm in, and they just do an awesome job. It makes my job really easy. If I need help, I make a phone call, and it's amazing how fast things can get done. The ferry had $250,000 worth of work done to it this last year. The Post-Journal was very helpful and put our message out, said that we needed help, and they were helpful in getting, I mean, we had a fundraising goal of $50,000, and I don't know, the numbers aren't tallied and official yet, but I think that we've surpassed that.
Congratulations.
So it's a, you know, it's a great thing to keep that piece of history going.
So you live on the lake, you own through your son the Chautauqua Bell on the lake, you are the president of the Bemis Point Stowe Ferry on the lake. Why an interest in the lake?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, 20 years ago, you know, I got involved in the Chautauqua Lake Association because I wanted herbicide sprayed in front of my house, to be honest with you. We had a heck of a mess. It was just like Burtis Bay this last year. It went from the point on Maple Springs down to Long Point State Park. And you could walk out there. And it was insane. And I got on the board, and I was going to change some things, and slowly but surely I came around and realized that there's other ways to handle Mother Nature than maybe spraying herbicide and that kind of thing, and that's kind of where I've come today after 20 years. It's taken me a long time to get there, but I got there, or that's where I am. So
who was the executive director when you joined the board?
Well, that would have been Paul Swanson. Great guy. He's with the organization, I'm going to say, for what, 30-some years, something like that. And he's now retired, and he made the organization what it was. He passed it on to us, and hopefully we don't disappoint him.
And for those who are from Chautauqua, may remember Donna Swanson, right, Donna? Who was the
Doc Stewart.
Doc Stewart, yes.
Yeah, she was awesome too. Oh, the fabric of Chautauqua Lake, you know, the community.
And Chautauqua Institution was also blessed for a period of time, for like 30-some years, with the assistant to the vice president for operations and director of operations, Doug Conroe. Doug, I'm going to flip it over to you. And since you are the sergeant of arms at Rotary, I noticed this crowd here, so hopefully you have control of this crowd at all times, given your background.
It's a wonderful challenge. But frankly, I'd rather hear more about Paul.
Well, you know, you sent me your resume. You're a Jamestown High School graduate, a couple of years older than me. But of interest to me is the fact that you were a graduate of Kent State University during a pivotal time in our history. Can you talk a little bit about that time period?
I was a slow learner. I had to graduate twice. So I was there for 2 degrees, and during that time was an interesting time in the United States, the Vietnam War, the protests about it, and on the Kent campus it was not different than a lot of other campuses except for one tragic event.
What was your role there? You actually had a position.
At that point I was a graduate student that year,
okay.
And I was in the Office of Student Conduct Programs.
So you're in charge of Office of Student Conduct. Did you have any idea, given that title and role, that things were going to escalate? I mean, certainly not to that ultimate point, but things were escalating?
Well, the good news was I wasn't in charge. I was a student graduate assistant there, and yes, we knew what was happening, unfortunately. You know, you never know day to day what's coming, but this was year 2 of 2 years of nationwide student protests. We had gotten through the previous year, And that year actually had more protests. Unfortunately, 1970 was a tragic year.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier that you felt the year before, 69, was probably more contentious than even 70. Is that right?
That's right.
And why was that? Do you know?
More protests, more activity. Students for Democratic Society came in from out of town and got people riled up, and then it took off. Sociology department got involved, and it was a troublesome time. That was interesting. At that point, I was president of all the residence halls as a senior, and we had a closed circuit television circuit in all the halls, and the student government officers were able to get on that, and we were able to get everyone understanding what's happening, where to go, where not to go, and we were able to get ahead of it. Unfortunately, in 1970, that wasn't able to happen and didn't get ahead of it.
So you graduate from, and you get your master's at Kent State University, and where's your next career path? Where does it take it? How do you come back here?
Well, my next career path was staying in the academic setting. I spent 10 years as a director of housing and safety, director of residences, transition to housing. We change titles every 3 or 4 years, you know, in academics. So when I left there after 10 years, I've been a director of housing and safety at a small private college, Hiram College, not far from Kent. And the lake here, it was time to change. As college administrators, you know, every 5 years or so they switch around. It had been 10. It was time for me to switch around. And looking at options, hometown opened up. So hallelujah.
So you come back to the area. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Jamestown? You mentioned Jamestown, but did you have access to the lake in those early days? Did you have? Was your dad a boater? Was those type of things?
Correct. Grew up in Jamestown. As they talk about generations here at Chautauqua, I'm a third generation Chautauqua Lakeside resident.
Okay.
The summertime, my grandparents bought the cottage that's still in the family next door to our house the summer before I was born. So I've been at that cottage or my house portions of every summer of these 70 plus years, and have seen the lake at its best, seen the lake at its worst, enjoyed it, and still am there and still plan to stay there. There's no for sale sign in front of my house.
So you're up in the Maple Springs area, as is Paul. Is he much of a neighbor?
Maple Springs is an interesting community, and we all have interesting backgrounds and situations, and the lake is a focus. So in Maple Springs, a lot of people focus more on the lake than they do on their neighbor. So I get the pleasure of seeing Paul from time to time, but really we're out on the lake because he's out on the lake.
You find your way back into the Jamestown area, but many of the people here know you as Chautauqua Institution, Director of Operations. So whenever a tree had to be moved or something had to do with the building or something, somehow Doug Conroe's in the middle of it all. How did you get connected to Chautauqua? What was the draw?
The luck of the draw.
Ah.
The luck of the draw. Back here, I had 2 different jobs back then. I was the first executive director of the Chautauqua Lake Association, nonprofit, low budget. I knew that would never support my family. So I was also involved in the family business, my father's business. And that business supplied materials, specialty materials to contractors. And we were supplying materials for the amphitheater that was being reconstructed at that time. So here I was up here in the midst of winter, and if you know what we've had this past week being in that amphitheater, it was twice as cold inside as it was outside. And we were in there, we were supplying doors and toilet partitions and different things, and I heard of this opening. So I put my name in, and luck of the draw, next 30 years, I was here.
At the time, who was the president? The Bratton?
Dan Bratton came in About 2 months before I did.
Okay.
Yeah, we came pretty much the same time. And I worked mostly with Tom Smith.
Give me your best Doug Conroe at Chautauqua story.
It was a history of superlatives. So, and if I tell you the real best story, there are people in the room who I probably won't survive the evening. So,
That's why you're the sergeant at arms.
yeah, so I had best not relate that. I mean, that was an opportunity that, as I look back on, is unmatched. What happens here at the institution, the people you get involved with, and the experiences that you have just are unbelievable, and the whole wide gamut. So it was just something that few people get to experience. You know, one of the things I remember most is when Bill Clinton was here, and it was my job to take care of everything outside the hotel, essentially. And I was introducing him to my staff. And next to me was Judy Wolcott, the housekeeping services supervisor, and I introduced her to him, and he said, "Oh, where are you from, Judy?" And she said, "Sugar Grove." Not a bustling metropolis. And he said, "Do you know so-and-so?" "Well, yeah. I talk to her now and then. She's not feeling well. You should give her a call." Wow. You know, the President of the United States, who has a few other things on his mind, at that time re-election, talked to her about giving a small town woman a call over her health. Yeah. I mean, you know, so I mean, there are spectacular stories, but that one obviously sticks in my mind. It's just unbelievable. And it tells you a little something about the character of a lot of our presidents and how they came to be president and how they, you know, became political that they were and what they learned getting there. I mean, that just continued to this day to floor me that that would be the case.
You were the first executive director of the Chautauqua Lake Association. What was the Chautauqua Lake Association at that time? What kind of drew you to them as far as mission, personnel, etc.? Was there an aha moment as to I want to get involved?
Well, the lake has always been a huge part of my life. You know, I was in the first boater safety course ever offered on this lake. Bob Clute up at the Chautauqua Lake Boatyard, as the Chautauqua Marina was known at that time. The lake was just part of my life. And I had a boat on it, from canoe to outboard with 3-horse motor on it, to larger outboard, to the vessel I have today. So I got a phone call from the treasurer of the Lake Association, who I happen to know otherwise. And he said, "We need to make some changes to move forward here. We've never had an executive director. We need to do that. We need to step it up. Are you interested?" Well, how do you say no?
So what was the status at the time as far as harvesters, as far as what was its mission at that moment? And what year was that, by the way, when you first became executive director?
1980.
1980. So give me a snapshot of what it looked like then.
They had the Aqua Trio, which was a harvester, a transport, and a shoreline conveyor. Had two of those setups. Had the old cutters, the Clipper and the Manatee, which were essentially a very small capacity machine, not well designed, had a lot of weed loss, had a basket that didn't carry much. So when you filled it, it took a half hour to get back to empty it. Not terribly efficient, not the efficiency of today at all. And that was pretty much it. And it was a localized operation. Pretty much never moved out of Burtis Bay much. Over Fouvan up into Greenhurst. Really didn't get up north, and it needed to.
So give me a progression of how the entity that we know today kind of grew from that, the Genesis 1980 snapshot, to where you are in 2018, 19.
The Lake Association has always benefited from community leaders being on its board and bringing resources to the table from time to time, and it's grown over that time. There are a lot of old stories from way back when. At that time, G. James Creighton, Gary Creighton, very successful businessman, Eaton Corp, owned Chautauqua Hardware. He took a major initiative forward, and he got the foundations to come forward with more equipment. Fred Heff, former Jamestown Telephone, then Mid-Continent Telephone. Fred was on the board. He was a great guy. He knew if there wasn't anybody he knew, they didn't exist, pretty much. So together, the two of them, Paul Sandberg was Gebby Foundation, you know, owner, Carnahan Clothing Store, downtown Jamestown. Good community service leaders. They got together, and working with them, we were able to increase the capacity of the Lake Association. We made some personnel changes, and that's when Paul Swanson came on board. He came on board about a year and a half after I was there. And it just started to fall together. Look, this is what we've got to do. This is what it's going to take to do it. And this is how we're going to do it. And they convinced the foundations to support us with the equipment and some startup financing. I worked on the fund drive aspects and greatly increased that. Brought computers into the organization. Back then, computers were a third of this room or something. You know, our first IBM 1130 was really something. But all of that initiative happened, and then the board just built on it from there to where we are today.
Since you initially started as a lower basin effort, what was the decision to kind of go up to the other basin to basically take the lake out?
The Lake Association forever had solicited from the entire lake perimeter, and it realized that there's more to the lake than one area. And it worked very hard, and we still work hard today to make sure that we can be servicing the whole lake. So that's just, there's a need. We saw that need, and we said, how can we fulfill it? And we started working that way to fulfill it. And that's where today we've ended up with 3 different crews. One at the south, one at the center, and one at the north. Just because of that desire, the need to do the whole lake, and to find a way to make it happen.
I'm reading from your mission statement. The Chautauqua Lake Association's mission is to provide effective and efficient lake maintenance services for the benefit of all Chautauqua Lake users. I'll read it. Promotes and facilitates the ongoing scientific study of Chautauqua Lake and its surrounding ecosystem, participates in and cooperates with local, state, and federal lake management programs, associations, and regulatory agencies, educates the community about Chautauqua Lake's ecosystems and environmental lake management practices. I mean, it's a broad, wonderful statement. The devil's always in the details, and can you talk a little bit, maybe, Paul, you might have a sense from your perspective, what's the size of the lake? Give us a sense, you know, mileage and all that stuff.
Well, the lake itself, probably about 21 miles long. You've got a 3-mile outlet, the Chautauqua River. And the widest point is about 2.5 up towards Dewitteville Bay, going across to the Chautauqua area. You've got about 13,000 acres, a little bit more than that. Deepest spots up around Midway Park or just off Maple Springs, 70 feet, 75 feet. And the lake on the north end averages probably 40 or 45, 50 feet. The south end anywhere between 12 and 16 or 18 feet. So it's a sizable body of water.
Do you get a sense of the, Paul, I know as president, since your principal donor base would be those who own property on Chautauqua Lake, kind of the economics of it all, number of property owners, their real property tax base percentage of Chautauqua, those type of things?
Yeah, I can give you some rough numbers. They're not exact, but I think there's about 3,000 lakefront property owners, 3,500 is there, Doug, somewhere around there, yeah, about that. And inside the ring, we call it, inside of 430 and 394, there's about $6 billion of assessed property valuation, and I think the entire county has maybe 9 or something like that. So, you know, 2/3 of the community is, or the assessed valuation is inside of that ring. And it provides Chautauqua County with its economic lifeblood. It is the driver in Chautauqua County. Without the lake, we have, nothing against them, but we have Steuben County or something like that, Allegheny County. Beautiful places, but just, you know, nothing but country. And the only thing that one of the things that we really have left here is what the economic driver is in Chautauqua.
How do you reach out, how do you get your message out to that number of property owners that are along the lake? Is it, you actually go out, solicit them? How does Paul Stage, Doug Conroe, you knock on their doors just to get the message out?
Well, first of all, it's not Paul and Doug, it's the Chautauqua Lake Association, okay? And it's a number of volunteers. I mean, there are a lot of volunteers, and there's a great staff, excuse me, staff. And we constantly mail. We're on Facebook. We try to get articles out to the newspaper and keep people informed of different things that are going on around the area or with the lake. And it's just, yeah, it's one, quite frankly, one of our biggest challenges is education and communication.
Talk about your governance, Paul. You're the president. Board membership. How did one get to be a board member? Is it sort of do you have a term rotation? How does that work?
So typically the president comes in and is there for 2 years. Some of the presidents have been on board. I think we had one that was 7 years. It just depends on the term and the willingness of the individual. It's a big time commitment. There's a huge time commitment. So because it's an unpaid position, obviously it's a volunteer position, as is all of our board members. And we expect a lot from them, and they give us a lot. They work hard. They're out talking to the public all the time. We try to get our message out that way.
How many board members do you have?
Well, there's about 15. It comes and goes. People move on and off the board, but around there.
And the paid staff, Doug is the chief executive officer. How many other employees?
So
what's your employee structure?
We have 4 people in the office, or 4 people that would, 3 people in the office and 1 person that's a shop manager. And then we have, I believe there's 2 or 3 people that are working throughout the winter on the harvesters and the barges and doing, year-to-year maintenance. Our machines look just like they're brand new. They're really well kept. And the biggest thing with an operation like ours is that you've got about a 6 or 8 week period to do your business, and you work all year long on the equipment to make sure that the day June 1st hits and the stuff is ready to go. And it's, I liken it to the steamboat. I mean, you've got to have it in the water and going, and it's got to be running full speed ahead.
Mm-hmm. How many employees during the summer do you have?
Our payroll goes up to about 30.
Yeah.
We have a number of kids that we bring in to, these kids work hard. I'm sure all of you have seen them along the shoreline, and I'm sure that many of you have brought down a lunch or muffins or cookies or something to bribe them a little bit and say, hey, keep it going, keep working hard and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there's a lot of great kids. It builds a lot of character. I'll tell you what, you pitch seaweed all day long for 2 or 3 months, and you'll learn about life and what you don't want to do for the rest of your life. Why that college education is important.
So we're going to flip it back to Doug here a little bit. Doug, with regards to some of your programs you got harvesting, nearshore maintenance, debris removal, and you talked about having 3 crews, north, center, and south. How do you orchestrate that? Who quarterbacks the daily activities? Is that you?
I oversee it, of course. That's part of my responsibility. But James Capolino our lake person is really the one that oversees the day-to-day, daily duties. I have to digress though for just a second here. You know, talked about president for 7 years. Because of where we are, that president was W. George Weaver, a Chautauquan, North Lake Drive, avid muskie fisherman.
That's right.
So, you know, the small world we live in.
Yep.
But so James really is responsible for ongoing daily operations, and he has staff at each other site that oversee that, usually the transport operator.
I'm looking at a 2-page sheet you sent me, and I'll just highlight that, again, harvesting, nearshore maintenance, debris removal, SUNY, Fredonia assistance, citizen state-wide lake assessment program, harmful algae bloom monitoring, macrophyte inventorying and density monitoring, mussel presence monitoring, herbivore monitoring, invasive species management, watercraft steward program, and so on. How do you prioritize that? My God, I mean, this is amazing.
It is. And they're all important priorities because managing Chautauqua Lake requires a comprehensive, well-rounded approach. So they're all top priorities. And we work them into the budget and make it happen that way. We take very seriously our steward role in this lake. And we realize it's a multi-use lake with conflicting users who have different purposes. The bottom line is what's best for the health of the lake, because that's what's brought people here, that's what's kept people here, and that's what's important. So we have all these programs that then can narrow in on improving the lake, keeping it going. And people think of us, you know, as the weed harvesting people, because that's what you see. The other things that you mentioned are what you don't necessarily see, but are a critical aspect of the program. You just can't take the harvesters out there and let that be your program. You just can't implement a herbicide program and let that be your program. You have to understand unintended consequences that result from your programs. You have to understand the interrelationship of people and the environment, the interrelationship of aquatic habitat, and how that plays out. And that's what's brought people here. People are here because of the things they like about the lake.
Back to Paul for a second. Paul, when he found an interest in the Chautauqua Lake Association, you admitted that you're really concerned about herbicide. Man, let's just, my lake frontage needs some help. You know, find some diquat and let's just put it in or something like that. I mean, what was your thing? Huh?
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, I bought a 5-gallon can. I decided I was going to do it myself. It was something. I said I just can't deal with this. But that 5-gallon can went away. It didn't go in the lake, so I was talked out of that. But yeah, you know, it's a heavy lift to try to get your arms around all the different things that are going on in the lake.
So talk about your own personal journey, Paul. Went from a guy that is going to use that 5-gallon can, to the chagrin of Doug, to a point where you're now the president of the Chautauqua Lake Association, and through one of its principal missions is harvesting.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think that part of it was just beat into our heads over the course. We were, the Lake Association at that time was applying herbicide. And the DEC subsequently came out and said, look, you've got to update your environmental impact statements. They've fallen by the wayside here. And until you do that, and then there was a couple of lawsuits brought against us. And, you know, we just came to the conclusion that this took way too much time. Management time, board time, it was too expensive. And we came to the realization that the DEC was, you know, we would apply for 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 acres, and we would get 40, or we would get 200. I mean, it was insane. I mean, it was ridiculous. You would work very hard to accomplish this, think you had it all lined up, and then, you know, it would get thrown in your face. And then once you got the 200 acres, the guy would come out and he'd look in the water and say, you don't got 50% coverage here, you're out of here. You know, he says, we're not going to let you do this. and where you needed to have it done was in excess of 6 feet of water. So now, well, you can't go in excess of 6 feet of water. There's all of these rules and regulations that the DEC has that didn't allow herbicide to be applied. So that kind of slowed, personally, me down, and I started to begin to realize the difficulty of getting that weed mess in front of my house, because it was in 10 or 12 feet of water. I mean, it was out away from my dock. It was a long ways away, and I mean, I couldn't get my boat out through it. But anyways, you know, so that kind of slowed us down, and the Lake Association at that time stepped back, and you know, as part of the board, I had to step back as well, and I just kind of went along and tried to understand what was happening, how it was occurring, and today, I mean, we've been asked many, many times, well, would you apply herbicide again? Why don't you do it? It's a very popular thing. Everybody sprays around their trees with Roundup. They spray their sidewalk with Roundup, and they think it just kills it. It doesn't react the same way in water that it does on your trees or around your trees or on your lawn. And I'm not a chemist, and I'm not a biologist, and I'm not even going to try to explain how that all comes together, but it's different. And because of that, we have New York State DEC to help us work our way through it all. And I got to tell you, I personally think that the environmental rules have gotten more difficult rather than they have eased up. I very seldom do I see New York State go backwards with regulation. And I mean, maybe they have, but right now we just don't see it. And it's so expensive to spray that we as the Lake Association can't afford it. We just can't do it. I mean, you're looking at several $1,000s per acre. My personal estimate is somewhere around $5,000. By the time you get costs added in for lead agencies and lawsuits and SEIS statements that have to be updated every 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then the cost of the application itself depends on how far you can scale it. If you can get a permit for any length of time, maybe you don't have to go back quite so often. But I would say that you're looking at probably $4,000 to $5,000 per acre versus, and I'm sure that there'd be people that disagree with that, but $4,000 to $5,000 per acre, and we harvest for about $300 or $400 or $500 per acre, depending on the density and what the situation is. But there's it's a 10 to 15 cents on the dollar comparative. And why would you want to spend millions of dollars to spray herbicide, which is going to have, at the end of the day, essentially the same effect?
So it's cost-benefit analysis.
It's huge. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And one of the problems we have right now is that our town officials and our county officials have abdicated their responsibility here. They've kind of got caught up in a groundswell of public support for herbicide, and it's they're going to have to look at the economics at some point in time, because they're the ones that are going to have to pay for it. Everybody says, yeah, let the state do it. Well, we're all state taxpayers. I don't think the state's going to pony up any more money. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll give us some, but it's not going to be continual. And once you get into these programs, you have to continue to do it on and on and on and on and on. So,
just out of curiosity, I live in the Lakewood area, and lake levels seem to go up and down. How does that play into your mission and your thoughts concerning whether the effectiveness of the herbicide, harvesting? What's the role of the lake level?
You're playing into my my hand here. I mean, there's not a lot of us out here that really have talked about lake levels and the problems, but that lake level is one of the things that we have in our control today that we can change. And I'm maniacal about it. I mean, I text the guy in the dam probably, or call him a couple, 3 times a week, or every other week, because if you drop the lake level down in the winter, which right today I think it's 1307.8. It really needs to be down to 1307.1 or 2. I mean, we could lose another foot or half a foot. There's restrictions on the Chautauqua that don't allow it to go down much further than that. But if we could do that, that ice then forms out another 30 or 40 feet into the littoral zone. You know, we were really fortunate last year because we had a heavy ice cover and we had a light ice cover. And that does a couple of things. It stops the sunlight from getting down in the spring when the plants start to grow. And it also scours the bottom of the shoreline, as it melts and starts to move. The ice, I don't know, you all seen the ice move, I'm sure, where it comes up, and I mean, this year it piled up in front of my shore. And I had it was 8 or 10 feet high. It was amazing. Mother Nature's amazing. But, you know, it just brings in all this debris and that kind of stuff with it. But it'll clean that whole thing out. And I didn't have, personally, I didn't have any kind of weed growth on my lakefront until probably almost the 1st of July, where it was, there was nothing. So that lake level, if it's down in the winter, going back to that lake level, and then up in the summertime, we really need a pond level of 1308.6 or 8 that allows for more boating recreation, better recreation, because you can get your boat in and out easier, off your lift easier. So the recreational folks are taken care of. From a environmental standpoint, the sunlight can't get to the bottom. You're adding another 1.5 foot or so of water, and that water, depending on clarity, can diffuse that sunlight. I mean, everybody knows that you need sun and fertilizer and water to make a plant grow, and we got all that going out there. So if you take any one of those components away, well, the only one we can really control is that sunlight getting in there. And if you can take that away, then you slow down the plant growth. It was huge this year because it allowed the Lake Association to keep up with everything. We weren't in a position where we were running behind, with the exception of 2 areas in the lake, Burtis Bay and Fluvanna Head. There's about 300 acres that were a mess.
Who controls the Warner Dam?
That's a great question, and I hope you can get that guy up here. Hey, well, we're just going to use one. Test 1, 2. I hope you can get that guy up here. You know, it's one of these.
Yeah.
You get that? Okay. Yeah. It's either the city of Jamestown or the county of Chautauqua or the DEC guy down in Pittsburgh. And when they don't like the answer, that one doesn't like the answer that you're getting at, then they point to the other guy. So if you can figure that one out, Greg, and I've asked that question 100 times. I mean, I have my own ideas who pulls the switch. And quite frankly, personally, if I could, deal with that guy, I mean, that guy'd be gone. I mean, I'd take his pension, I'd take his health insurance, I would take everything from that guy so that he felt some of the pain that every one of you feel out here in the summertime. I mean, you get me excited here.
It's a good thing we have a sergeant at arms right here.
He's ready to poke me.
Well, that's great, Paul. I'm glad you have some passion.
Yeah, we've got passion, okay.
So tell me, Doug, this is a question for Doug here, and I might as well get you calmed down. Tell me about the lake. I mean, here we are. We're here because we're interested in the lake. What's the status of the lake? Is the lake getting worse, getting better? What's your sense of it?
Well, I've had over 70 years to observe it,
yep.
And I've seen worse. I've seen much worse. You know, when I was a kid, I think I can remember back then, I remember burning up my old Scott outboard motor, getting out through the weeds, the algae. Clogged the intake, it overheated, boom. That was tragic because there wasn't a lot of money in my piggy bank to replace that motor. So that ruined that summer. The lake cycles naturally. You know, we see the newspaper clippings of 100 years ago about the terrible weed problems. I mean, this past summer, it's a shame. It's a crying shame that Burtis Bay was poster boarded as Chautauqua Lake. As Paul said, 300 acres down there. Well, the other 12,700 acres were usable, were enjoyable, were workable. The water clarity was better than it had been in years. I was talking with Todd Tranum, the Chamber of Commerce, and said, you know, okay, there are these problems. You got a boat. You have any problems this summer? No, I was over at Sandy Bottom all the time. The phosphorus level in the lake has been constantly rising. It appears on a short term to be kind of leveling off as it's rising. And that phosphorus level, phosphorus nitrogen level, are what we're concerned about when it comes to harmful algal blooms. The harmful algal blooms this past summer were there. They were serious. They were fewer. It was a better summer. The lake cycles, what's it going to do next year? Somebody tells you they know, don't believe them. I don't know. We could not have predicted Vertis Bay last summer. We could not have predicted Vertis Bay last spring. Vertis Bay was fine until all of a sudden it turned. And unfortunately, it was terrible. But you couldn't predict it, and you can't predict it coming next summer. The ecologists are telling us, look, those weeds came up roots and all. 2019 is going to be better there because the weeds aren't there. I'll wait and see. We'll see what happens. But overall, I think Chautauqua Lake is a great lake. It continues to be. It's going to be a good lake to use. I said the for sale sign isn't up in front of my house. As a matter of fact, I just bought a piece of property next to the house. I wouldn't put that expensive investment in it if I didn't think the lake were good and had a future.
Paul was talking a little bit about, the cost-benefit analysis, which that's economics. That's pure economics. And based on that, the benefit of using harvesting as opposed to herbicide. For the record, are you against herbicide? How do you factor that in your thinking at the Chautauqua Lake Association?
It's factored in.
Yeah.
We all have our toolboxes, and we have tools in them. Some tools we use every day, other tools we use once a year. To me, herbicide's the once every now and then that we use. It's not a daily use. I designed, managed, and oversaw the largest herbicide program that ever existed on this lake. I'll tell you right now, that was a mistake. Should not have done it. I learned, that was 40 years ago. I've learned a little in 40 years.
Just for my own corporate memory, is that the times when you'd say for 2 or 3 days the Chautauqua Lake nobody could swim and you'd put
right?
That was the time period.
That was the time. We always tried to do it immediately after Memorial Day holiday, but early enough so it didn't affect the July 4 holiday because there are various time periods.
Yeah, okay.
And we did it pretty much then. Then later, as the supplemental environmental impact statement that the county developed, which was an excellent document, and still has applicability today, said do it in July, so then there was that. There is a place for herbicide use in Chautauqua Lake. Spot treatments, not general, as need develops. I would have recommended herbicide in Vertis Bay last summer when that program developed. I've said that in the newspaper. If hydrilla, a new invasive species, shows up in the lake, I think we need to find the strongest herbicide that they make and get in there. Otherwise, it's going to be millions of dollars dealing with it. But when I look at the other unintended consequences of applying herbicide, and I look at how harvesting doesn't have those unintended consequences, why would I do that to Chautauqua Lake? When I make decisions, Greg, take my neighbor's approach, the Seneca's approach. Is a decision I make today the best decision for the next 7 generations? Because if it is, then that's an appropriate decision. If it's just serving me, and I'm a baby boomer, I'm the me generation. I'm the immediate gratification generation. And that's what we see a lot of around this lake. I say no. I'm looking at it in a much wider perspective. And when I look at the pluses and the minuses, cost benefit is huge in this community. because we've always underfunded lake maintenance, always. And so, and I look at wanting to serve the whole lake, not just a portion of it. I think the permits that were applied for last year were about 13 miles of permitting territory. You know, there's roughly 40 miles we service. You're going to spend more money to do that. If those permits have been granted, they would have cost more than the Lake Association spent last year servicing the whole lake. So yeah, cost benefit is there, but there's more to it than that. There's the aquatic ecosystem, there's a human health risk, there's a carcinogenic risk, there's all kinds of things that factor into it.
Invasive weeds, certainly a sense perhaps, and I don't know if it's based on anything, that large portions of the lake are overwhelmed by invasive weeds. Is that accurate?
Absolutely inaccurate. That's a misleading statement that's out there. No. We have monitoring. We hire an independent monitor to come in. Racine Johnson, aquatic ecologist. They've been in here every year since 2002. They're watching plant growth patterns. Your Eurasian water milfoil that everybody talks about is less. It was a little more this year around Burris, Savannah. The rest of the lake, it is less. Curly-leaf pondweed naturally dies off in July. It was less this year. You had fewer instances of curly leaf to the surface this year than you did the previous year. Invasive species have become colonized. They're part of our ecosystem now. And we need to look at how they affect that and how they're working with the natural plants. I don't talk a lot about invasive species when I talk about plant management in the lake. I talk about nuisance species management. Because the main nuisance species in the lake right now is Elodea. It's not invasive, it's a native, but it grows to nuisance. And that's what we're about. We're trying to deal with those nuisance situations that make the lake unusable, that cause conditions so that harmful algal blooms can form. Harmful algal blooms like still water. Weeds to the top of the surface create still water. So if we can stop them from coming to the top of the surface, we can harvest them, keep that water flowing, we can decrease the number. So invasive species is an overused, and that myth has been factually documented that no, it's not worse than it has been, and it's not getting worse in terms of invasives.
You've been in business since 1953, and as part of that is you've used the term lake steward of Chautauqua Lake. And is there a sense that the lake management is sort of status quo, or needs to change? Do you get a sense of that, or is there is this flowing as you'd like it to go?
Earlier, okay, I'll let it go. Okay. Earlier this evening, you went down a list of things that the Lake Association does. There's nothing status quo there. Out of those, what, 10, 15 things? 30 years ago, 20 years ago, the list wasn't that long. There is always new and different exciting things. And there is always different management that we learn from. You know, I get involved more than just Chautauqua Lake. I was on the founding board of the Federation of New York State Lakes Associations. I'm on the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission. I'm twice chairman, past chairman of that. I'm currently on its executive committee and a committee chair. 3 weeks from now, I'll be sitting at that commission table next to the commissioners of environmental conservation from 8 states and a US EPA representative. No, there's no status quo. I mean, you may be doing some things the same. That doesn't mean it's status quo. That means you're doing the right thing because you've learned that's the way to go. That's a myth that's out there that needs to be put to rest.
Paul, you being president, and now with a good clear mic, there is an approach that's being discussed, and we'll talk about it at our next meeting with the county executive, which is kind of a consensus building, balanced approach. It's concept. It's conceptual. How would you advise the county executive to sort of approach that initiative? You got a number of organizations, a number of stakeholders. Many of them will be here over the next few weeks. Just as a strategy session from your perspective as president of the CLA, because you're one of the primary stakeholders.
That's a tough one. He's going to have his hands full. You know, I don't know that there will be a consensus amongst all lake groups. I think that a number of lake groups may have or may be able to come to the table and develop a consensus. That could happen without him possibly, but you know, I think that he's got his hands full.
If you were, again, you're in a position to maybe advise him as to an approach to take, you get a sense how you might advise him?
You know, he's got to look at everything in its grand sum, and you know, again, I have to go back to the number. I mean, he's spending our county tax dollars, and at the end of the day, I just don't see the cost benefit. I'm a financial guy. That's where I come from. You know, other people will have a biology view or something like that, but I think at the end of the day, he's got to protect the county taxpayers and where those funds are coming from.
Same answer, Doug, for you? George calls you and says, "Hey, Doug, what do you think?" Maybe he has.
Be true to the lake, George. It's a tough one. Yes, it is. You know, the Lake Association is takes very seriously the steward of the lake. The lake comes first. Social, political concerns come second. And George needs to get that message from us, from others, that we're concerned about the lake now and the next 7 generations. Social, political considerations are concerned about today, immediate gratification. And the message, and that's going to be hard. And is that all going to come together? As I talk with friends at the Watershed Conservancy, or go out to Audubon, or visit Roger Tory Peterson Institute, talk to other groups around, we're all on the same page. When I sit at the Water Quality Task Force table, we're all on the same page. Some people do things a little different than others. We all have the same goal. So, I mean, there is a consensus out there. And hopefully George will recognize that. I personally am concerned about social political trumping out, because that's what's happening in public in general.
Let me just, I'm going to steal a little bit here from Todd Tranum, who you mentioned a little bit earlier. He recently wrote an article for the Post-Journal, and he talks about the infighting among various organizations. But then he goes on to state that to the credit of each organization, they are striving to enhance Chautauqua Lake, and for that they should be commended. In the midst of the animosity, it is important to recognize that various lake groups share that common goal and care deeply about the lake. I think that's your message.
Absolutely. And that conflict is only involving one group and the others.
Yeah.
It's blown out of proportion because people see conflict. They don't realize that all the groups are not in conflict.
We've got one specific question, then we'll ask one general question, and we'll wrap it up. There's been an idea, maybe Paul, as president, you might want to tackle this one, about a lake taxing district. First of all, what is the concept, and how might you, what's your sense about that?
So I don't know anything officially about it, but it's the old adage, be careful what you ask for. The lake really needs $3 or $4 million a year, or it might need $5 or $6 million a year if you want to do some dredging and different things. There is enough discourse in the community to rise to the level that's going to bring our our elected officials to a point where they're going to say, you know, we got to do something about this. And the only thing that they can do is create another tax district to facilitate the funds that are needed. I mean, I'll be honest with you, we're out there raising $750,000 a year, and it's hard. I mean, it is a lift. It's hard to do. It is not easy. Whether it's coming from the public or the towns or the county, you know, we're out here begging. We're having bake sales and canoe races to raise the money to take care of the lake. And it shouldn't be that way, but, you know, it is. So, you know, look around the room here, and, you know, you would want to ask some questions next week or 2 weeks from now, you got the perfect opportunity here. The guy's going to be here to tell you about it. And, you know, maybe he can share some ideas, but, you know, if everybody here wants to pay another $800 or $900 a year or something in that neighborhood, you know, maybe we can fix the problems in the lake, well, so that everybody's happy. I don't know.
Let me ask a last question, which is for both of you. Pierre Shagnon last week concluded by saying simply, this is an exciting time for Chautauqua Lake. And Pierre, is, for those who remember, is president of the Chautauqua Lake Alliance. Do you agree with him?
I'll tell you what, you know, we're passionate about the lake. I mean, every person in this room is here because they love Chautauqua. They sit at their breakfast nook or their dining room table and look at the lake when they're having a cup of coffee in the morning or their favorite restaurant. And people here love the lake. So, you know, Pierre is probably right in the money when he says that it's exciting times for it because people care. And to see the lake actually get some of the attention that it needs is awesome.
Doug?
It's interesting that you mentioned that from Pierre. Past president of the Chautauqua Lake Association was Roger Shagnon, Pierre's father.
Yeah.
You know, small world. A lot of good leadership over the years. I've sat on many committees in my 40 years here, so to speak, at the county level. I was on, you name it, I've probably been on it. Every one of those committees and every report that's ever been issued has said this lake needs a lake management district, and that will be the only way to finance what the lake needs. Every report, and the Chautauqua Lake Association has endorsed those reports and those recommendations historically. Now we come to the highest taxed county in the nation, essentially, and the highest taxed state in the nation. And are we going to put another tax level on it? Wow, I don't know if that's going to happen. The devil's in the details. We don't know how this is going to be formed. We don't know what its responsibilities are. We don't know how it's going to do taxes. So, you know, are we ready to endorse it? No, we need to see the print. But that is where everything has directed itself that way. And I think that the important thing is that Pierre's committee of the legislature that's looking at this heard from Juanita Lamoka, and they heard the message. You need the public on board. You need public hearings. You need public involvement. And if George brings that to fruition, it's the public involvement that sells it. And if they do that and don't try to slip it through, there is a way to slip it through. But if they take it head on and out there with the public, I think they got a chance. And it is, as you said earlier, and as Pierre said, it's an exciting time. I cannot recall when I have seen as many people and organizations interested in Chautauqua Lake as are interested today. And whether there's conflict or not, that's good.
Terrific. With that, Doug Conroe, Paul Stage, thank you very much for sharing.
My name is James Sloan. I run the transporter picking up weeds from the cutters. I keep telling my wife, well, maybe I shouldn't work this summer, but I just keep doing it every year. It's too much of a nice job to be out here.
It's too good of a job?
Yeah. I met Steve a couple years ago and we work well together.
What we do is we'll go to an area that we know that there's weeds in there, and we will actually harvest the weeds. We'll put them onto my machine until I get full. Then Jimmy Sloan comes along with his transport, and I'll unload onto him, and he then will take it back to a point where he can unload on land, where it gets put into a dump truck, and then Dave takes it up to a farmer's field and dumps the load, and then the process repeats itself several times during the day. To cut all the weeds in this lake in one season is virtually impossible. But on the other hand, I also know that we're doing a good thing for the homeowners around the lake.
Not everybody can play on the lake and get paid for it.
Chautauqua Lake is home for me, and I feel that my duty as a boat owner, a fisherman, and one who uses the lake to help take care of it. My name is Taylor West, and I'm a watercraft steward for the Chautauqua Lake Association. You're doing a service to the lake, and you're kind of the front lines prevention measure for stopping these aggressive aquatic plants from coming into the lake and out competing the native plant populations. It's very important to, clean your watercraft off, make sure there's no weeds hanging onto it. Oh, there's something there. Eelgrass. That are old Elodea. We're trying to prevent basically two main aquatic invasive species from coming in, which is hydrilla and the water chestnut. I find more and more reasons every day why I love this job. Interacting with people is probably the most important part. My name's Taylor.
Roy.
Nice to meet you.
You're doing a great job. We're really glad you're down here helping
hey, thank you.
keep the lake clean.
We'll do. Try our best. As a fisherman, I think it gives me an advantage, as a watercraft steward, because it allows me to connect with, a lot of people that I run into at the boat launch.
I'll be happy with one. One, to start.
They tend to think of you as more or less of their friend. I appreciate, the land, water, air, plants, how everything interacts with one another and how interconnected everything is in the environment. Just amazes me, and you're always learning.